Is that where we are? I believe. All right, 10, 11, and 12, and I don't want to make light of this at all. 10, 11, and 12 is basically going to be another vision where Daniel is given by God. It's probably my understanding that he would have no idea what God's talking about. But what he is talking about are those last few years where all the nations were going crazy. Remember, we had, wow, am I allowed to draw on this? It's so clean. I've never seen it this clean before. But maybe I'll use this one over here, right? We started with Nebuchadnezzar. Remember him? And Nebuchadnezzar, and then we went to his son. Who was his son? Nebuchadnezzar and Nabopolassar. And then we went to, what was the next guy? I can't remember. Darius or Cyrus? Huh? No, I think it was Darius first and then Cyrus. Darius and then Cyrus. It was under these two, particularly Cyrus, where the Jews came back from persecution. It's no good. Anyway, the Jews came back from persecution. But see, then the Xerxes came. X-E-R. I don't know how to spell Xerxes. X-E-S. And then Artaxerxes. His son. It was under Xerxes that he decided to go and see what he could do as far as taking over the rest of the world. This is the story of where Xerxes, the Persians, if you will, brought a mighty army to the door of Greece. We have the story of the 300 soldiers from Sparta, if you remember that. 300 men, and they were ordered by the king and all the city-states there in Greece not to aggravate these people. And of course, the famous Leonidas took his 300 men and went to where there was a little pass, a mountain pass that they had to come through in order to get to the rest of Greece. And there the 300 men made their stand and killed like 1,800 or 2,000 Persians, supposedly. You know, we're not sure if that's really true or legend or what, but anyway, that was Leonidas, and they told him, don't you engage these, let them just pass by. And of course, Leonidas couldn't do that, so he marched his men out, and the king tried to stop him, and he said, where are you going? He said, we're just going for a walk. And of course, that started the whole war. Well, it beat Xerxes up pretty bad, and things kind of went downhill from there, so he went back to Persia, and his son Artaxerxes took over. Well, in the meantime, a little old snot-nosed Greek guy named Alexander the Great, he decided to cause a ruckus. So eventually, Alexander came over here, and he decided, you know, one good favor deserves another, so he decided to go take over Persia. And he does. He destroys the Persian kings, he destroys the Persian government, destroys everything, takes over everything, just assumes everything. And then that wasn't enough for him, so he started coming around this way and going down. This is Jerusalem and all that over here, coming down through there, even heading towards Egypt and Ethiopia. He would die along that journey, and then that would be pretty much the Greek people would just kind of, some of them stayed in Persia because they settled over there, some of them over here. Now, what happens after this is the craziest part of history ever. You know, so you got the influence of the Persians, you got the influence of the Greeks, you got all these different influences, and this guy ruled a little here, and that guy ruled a little here, and this guy ruled a little here, and his wife, his daughter married this guy's son, and that son did that, and this down here in Egypt. And all of these mixed, mish-mash, mosh families going on, trying to grab something hold of, something that they can hold on to in this melting pot of an existence. Meanwhile, here's them. They came back, they rebuilt their little temple. Well, you know, so-and-so's uncle got mad because he wasn't invited to the wedding of this guy's son down here, and this and that didn't happen. So the whole group of people started to get together, and they were called the Seleucids. Seleucids, because it's all started with a guy named Seleucid, king whatever, and his daughter didn't get to go to this and have a buffet here and that and all this stuff. So he decided to build an army, and he'll just go and smash all these other guys. And these guys saying, well, they can't smash those other guys. We'll smash those other guys. And this is what goes on for 150 years. 150 years. Well, the Seleucids whipped around, and they were coming down here. The Ptolemies, another guy named Ptolemy, by the way, with a P, L-O-M-I-E, the Ptolemies, they swept up this way, and for the next, good Lord, who knows, 75 years, it was, you kill him, oh, you kill him, well, I'll take this city, well, I'll take that city. Back and forth, back and forth. I'm going to raise up an army. In the meantime, the Jews are trying to maintain their little bit of life, what life they have. And they these guys destroyed Jerusalem again. And the little temple they built back, you know, a little kind of, it wasn't a Herod temple or anything yet. It was like a glorified little outhouse. But that was destroyed again. And of course, they said, this is the famous, and I think it was these guys up here decided, oh no, that's not right. I think it's these guys down here, decided to set up the thing in the Bible, it's all mentioned everywhere, even to the Revelation, the great abomination of desolation. And that's where you hear about it right here in Daniel, that it's coming, and it will be in the place of the holy temple, what was once the holy temple, so that they can never again have worship or regularly scheduled anything to do with God. They were shutting down God on earth forever. And that's what they did, and this would remain for 1,290 days or something like that. It's all in there. And this would be a sign to all people that it's foolishness to believe in any God and all this other stuff. And it was just horrible, and the people were without God, they were without service, they were without worship, they were without everything they once knew, everything they once rejected, thrown into exile, finally brought back. They're trying to put it back together and make their little temple and get back on God's good side. Then these monkeys show up and start all this stuff, and now they've lost everything again. You got it? Good neighborhood to live in. After these guys get done beating the snot out of each other, and they go at it for quite a while. I mean, this didn't happen over a weekend. It's 75, 80, 100 years this is going on. So after that, then, of course, Judas Maccabeus rises up. He's a guy, he's a Jew guy, and he gets all the other Jew guys together. He says, enough of this. Let's take our land back. And they do this, and of course, this is where the whole concept of Hanukkah comes from. When they won their independence, the temple light, which the lampstand, the menorah, which represented God's presence, stayed lit for the whole time of the thing, the battle and all that stuff, even though there was no oil in the lamp, that stayed lit, and it was considered a miracle and all that. Anyway, they won their independence from Yom Kippur. I mean, not Yom Kippur, Hanukkah. Hanukkah was their Independence Day, and they enjoyed independence, but only for about 39 years or so, maybe 40 or 50. Kind of hard to say. But then another bad guy showed up, and of course this was Rome. And Rome would then dominate them for the next 350 to 400 years again. So this is the plight of the Jews up to the end of the Old Testamental period and the intertestamental period. All this was intertestamental, okay? By that I mean Old Testament's finished, New Testament hadn't started yet because Jesus isn't here. When Jesus comes, the New Testament starts. The Old Testament stops around 415, maybe 389, somewhere in there. Give or take a couple of decades. But this is all intertestamental stuff. If you want to read about this, you have to go get a book called an Apocrypha, and it'll have all the what they call the missing books of the Bible. And I didn't canonize the Bible. That's a whole nother class. Really boring. You're going to hate it. But it tells us how they formed the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they left out these books here. Well, the fact of the matter is, are those books important? Well, they don't have a whole lot of God stuff in them, but what they do have in them is historical record of these wars. And we can take that historical record and then lay it over against what Daniel saw, and God told him this is going to happen hundreds of years before it actually happened. You see, that's how we get the details of all this. And the people involved in this, you can read like 40 pages of just this guy fought that guy, and that guy got mad at him, and he got this. On and on and on and on. There is historical record, very detailed historical record of what went on here. And it all comes down to what God told Daniel happened, like I often say, with surgical precision. Almost to the day, to the letter. And that's why we know. So if God tells you that this is going to happen or that's going to happen, hey, I'm going to go out on a limb here. It's probably going to happen. So that's where the strength of our scripture comes from, not just our knowing or our reading or even a verbal witness, but a historical record. History proves God will do what God said he would do. So, and same thing with Jesus Christ. This man of sorrows will come, and he's named all these things that he will do, or will do when he gets here. And then all that stuff happens, 287 of them to be precise. And people say, well, Jesus isn't really the Messiah. He's not really God's chosen. Wow. I'm going to back that horse because I think he is. If he had got one or two right, okay, it might be some question. If he got 50% of them right, okay, it might be a little question. 100% every single prophecy made about him, most of which he had no control over, and they came true with a vengeance. I'm going to say God's going to do what God says he's going to do. So don't ever forget that when you're feeling frustrated in the world. Oh, why should I read the Bible? Well, because that's the one thing you can trust in our given history so far. There might be other things, but one given thing is that this. All right, so chapter 10, I'm not trying to believe the class. Chapter 10, 11, and 12 is going to deal with all of this. Okay, and it's good history and it's good purpose as evidencing the scriptures, but not a whole lot of theology in here other than Daniel listens, Daniel obeys because he loves his God, and his God does in fact save Daniel at the very end. There is a reference at the very end of chapter 12, the end of the book, where Daniel is told that he's to keep all this stuff in his heart, don't tell anybody. Write it down, close it up, and he will go to his rest. And at the end of his rest, whatever this means, he shall be brought forth and stand before the book and all that. Basically a reference to the final judgment, where the book of life is brought forth and his name is inscribed in it and all that other stuff. So there is a promise of God in the last revelation of chapter 12 that, Daniel's pretty much got his ticket on the bus to heaven. So, and some people reference it to this time, but most theologians will bring it to the end times. Daniel has done his job. He's been an obedient servant to God. He's kept God important in his whole life. He's defended God every turn when they were trying to take all the God stuff away, even to this point. And Daniel stands up and says, I'm going to be God's anyway. If I'm the last Jew on the earth, then fine, I'll be the last. They weren't Jews, they were Hebrews, but I'll be the last Hebrew on the earth. And so that's kind of how the book ends. So there's a lot of historical stuff in here. Listen out, you'll hear it in just a minute. Now, the problem was, of course, Daniel didn't understand any of this. Remember, no television, no mass communication. Way over there in Babylon. And God's telling him all this is going to happen. And Daniel's still a young man. But really, the whole concept of the world and nations that are zillions of miles away that Daniel had never seen or even heard of, and all of this is going to happen. God's talking on a global scale. Daniel's wondering, where he left his toothbrush this morning. And he's just a little kid that grew up basically in Babylon. A little bit in Jews, a little bit in Israel, but mostly in Babylon. All right? Fit all that into your concept as you're trying to understand all this. That, yeah, a little bit of faith, Jesus, you can say this mulberry tree be thrown in the sea and it'll go, if you're strong enough to do that. Daniel is one of those people. All right, look at number 10. Oh, by the way, one more thing. Get to it already, will you? Again, we're going back up here to Cyrus and Darius, and then we're going to be down here to Xerxes, and apocalyptic literature is bouncing all over the place. And then we're going to jump up to these that haven't even happened yet. You see what I'm saying? So that's the nature of apocalyptic literature. It's here, it's there, it's up there, it's down there, it's everywhere. So don't get crazy about that. Chapter 10, in the third year of Cyrus. See, we're back up to Cyrus now. Third year of Cyrus, Persian, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was also named Belteshazzar. Remember, they changed his name to Belteshazzar. And the message was true and one of great conflict. But he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. So in those days, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks. Remember, he was repenting. And sackcloth and ashes, last chapter. He said it was our fault. We deserve what we got. So he's still in that mourning, in that fasting and all that. So in those days, I, Daniel, have been mourning for 3 entire weeks. I did not eat any food, nor did I taste meat, wine, or none of that entered my mouth. Nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks were completed. Now, on the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, of course, Tigris and Euphrates, I lifted my eyes and I looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz, and his body was like that of beryl, his face the appearance of lightning, and his eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sound of his words was that of a tumult. Now I, Daniel, alone saw this vision, while the men who were with me did not see this vision. Nevertheless, a great dread fell upon them as well, and they ran away to hide themselves. So I alone was left to see this great vision, yet no strength was left in me. My natural color had turned to a deathly pallor, and I retained no strength. But I heard the sound of his words, and as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a deep sleep on my face. And my face was to the ground, and behold, a hand touched me, and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he spoke to me, saying, O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words that I am about to tell you, and stand upright, for I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken these words to me, I stood up trembling, and he said to me, Do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and humbling yourselves before the Lord God, your words were heard, and I have come in response. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. And then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Now I have come to give you understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet to be in the future. Now when he had spoken to me according to all these words, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. And behold, one who resembled a human was touching my lips before me. And I opened my mouth and I spoke to him, and who was standing before me. And I said, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, a great anguish has come upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can such a servant of my Lord talk with such as my Lord? As for me, there remains just now no strength in me, nor any breath has been left in me. With this, then, the one of the human appearance that touched me again and strengthened me. And he said, O man of high esteem, do not be afraid. Peace is with you. Take courage and be courageous. Now, as soon as he spoke to me, I received a great new strength and said, May the Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. And he said, "Do you understand why I came to you? But now I shall fight against the princes of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come." Now Daniel wouldn't even have known what a Greece was. This is Alex down here getting ready to come back. So even though he's speaking to him in the time of Cyrus, 3 more kings later is when, and then the Greece guy is about to come. "However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince." Okay, Michael, of course, is an angel from God, and he is the warring wrath of God kind of guy. What's happening in this chapter is just what I told you. It's getting ready to set up for this next movement after Alexander gets out of here. Then the whole world's going to get very abstract, so to speak. Nobody's really attuned with or have any allegiance to anybody. So you're going to have little leaders here and little leaders here and little leaders here and little leaders down here, and they're all going to try to grab what little power and might they can. And I'm not kidding you, the history of this period would fill 3 volumes this thick if you named every person that was involved in all that was going on here. For lack of a better term, it was global chaos at that time. You couldn't trust anybody. You couldn't base anything for anything. You have a little business, next thing you know, some Joe Blow and his band of 20 guys come through, kill you, take your business, take everything. And this is what life was for 150 years, or 120 years. A long time. Most, generations of people. And this is the confusion that it came to be after all of these conquerings of Persia, after the desolation of the Jews, and they've just come back now mostly under Cyrus, but a little under Xerxes, and they've come back, put their little town together, built their little temple back up, made the little walls around, trying to get back to some kind of normalcy in life, and then all this mess starts. And it would continue for a very long time. You couldn't trust anything, you couldn't count on anything, you couldn't, it was madness trying to live like that. Y'all don't know how great we got it here in America. And we want to throw this away for some reason. But anyway, that's what they had. Total chaos, total lawlessness. There was no sheriffs, no police patrol. Nobody alleged to anything. It was do what you want. Anything and everything goes. If you want it, steal it. If they won't take it, if they won't give it to you, kill them. Doesn't matter. You won't be hold. This is being held accountable to nothing. Total freedom, if you want to call it that, or total chaos, if you want to call it that. See, without rules, you're not really free, are you? Because the next guy behind you might have a sword right through you, and your freedom's done. He just exercised his. See what I'm saying? Freedom without law, without accountability, without responsibility is not freedom at all. And it's a horrible way to live. All right. That's what's happening in chapter 10, as you see. Chapter 11, we're back at Darius. Chapter 12, then, which ends it, and if y'all don't mind, we could just jump to chapter 12 and finish this up today, because this is what they're all going to do. Chapter 11 is all about these guys up here, these guys down here. They're all batting and swatting and clobbering each other. And the fortress, and then they're going to destroy this little temple they built. They're going to set up the abomination of desolation. And everybody says, what is the abomination of desolation? Well, what it was is nothing more really than a little, I don't know that you could even call it a chapel or a worship place, but it wasn't for God. It was for some of these maniacs, whoever they were, that decided, let's just get rid of the Jews once and forever. So on the Temple Mount, they destroyed the little temple that the Jews had built back. They built a little worship place for their pagan god. Pick a god, any god, doesn't matter. It was Baal, it was Asherah, it was anybody, but not Yahweh. And that's what that means. An abomination, something God hates, put in his place to desolate the Jewish religion. That they would never again hold their regular worship services. They would never again hear the preacher or the scrolls read or sing the hymns. They would never again have their sacrifices or the Yom Kippurs, or they would never again have access to God. So that's what abomination of desolation means. It's something God hates to drive his people away so that they won't worship anymore. They'll be left desolate. Okay? That's what that term means. The abomination of desolation. And it would stay there for quite a while until just before the Romans got back. Judas Maccabeus, of course, would clobber these guys and these guys, throw them all out of their town. The first thing they did was burn that thing down to the ground. And they cleaned it all off. They consecrated it again, and all the priests and all, and then they brought it back and they started to rebuild the temple again. Which is just over and over and over again. God's people in the temple have been clobbered, and it wasn't over yet, because the Romans would come to town, and of course in about, I'm going to say 57 AD, this poor temple is on its way out for the fourth time. And this is when Rome would destroy it, and Jesus predicted not one stone shall be left upon another. It'll come down to the ground. Oh no, that could never happen again. Jesus said, don't glory, don't marvel at the power of these buildings, because they're on their way out, fellas. And it'll be in your lifetime. It'll be in your seeing. You'll see this happen. And of course we know that's exactly what Rome did. And they destroyed it utterly, and it has been destroyed to this day. There is a church up there. It is a Muslim mosque, actually. And they call it the Dome of the Rock, which supposedly is built over the rock where Abraham offered Isaac, or was going to offer Isaac. And the Dome of the Rock, the only one sure mark we have is the Wailing Wall. It was the northwest wall of the Temple Mount, not the temple, but the Temple Mount, where the people would come and get their sacrifices ready. The tabernacle, however, the actual temple of Solomon, we don't know where that goes. And Jesus said when he comes back, he will build it back exactly where it's supposed to be. So anyway, the only mark we still have to this day is that tiny little hunk of the Romans left it there to remind the Jews that there is nothing they can't destroy. And so, but of course it's become the most sacred site of the Jews today, because that goes all the way back to Solomon's, when they built that mountain in the first place, and set up the worship of God. History is very tiring when you study it. There's a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of stuff over a whole long time that's amounting to a bunch of nothing except making people's lives miserable. Okay? And that's my job. So if you want to be miserable, you come to me. Don't go over there and fight solutions. All right, let's look at chapter 12. And I'm not trying to zip through this book at all, but it's all history. History. So I think we can probably skip over that a little bit. Let's finish it up. Chapter 12. Now, at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. Michael is the wrath of God, the law of God. Gabriel's the salvation boy. Michael is the boy, are you in trouble boy. You see what I'm saying? One's a warrior, one's a savior kind of situation. There's only three, by the way, three angels named in the Bible. Michael, Gabriel, and of course Satan. So he was a fallen angel. So, all right. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of great distress such as had never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. This is a reference to the book of life. Most theologians agree. If your name is written in the book, God's book, you will be rescued. And as many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake to everlasting life. But others, they will awake to disgrace and everlasting contempt. And those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven. and those who led many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever, they shall shine. But for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. In other words, don't tell anybody about this stuff. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others were standing, one on the bank of the river, and the other on the other bank of the river. And he said to the one dressed in linen, that's the one he saw back 2 chapters ago, that was over the waters. He says, who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end of all these wonders? And I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, raise his right hand and his left hand towards heaven. And he swore by he who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times and half a time. And soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, and all these events would be completed. As for me, I heard, but I could not understand. So I said, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these events? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end of time. Many will be purged, purified, and refined. But the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand. But those who have insight will understand. And from that time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days. But as for you, you go your way to the end. Then you will enter into your rest and will rise up again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. Pretty interesting closing there, eh? Daniel's saying, what's going to happen with all this stuff? You don't worry about it. You go to your rest. You've done your job. As for all of this mess, it'll happen. It'll take so many days, and he names them. And then this thing will come down, and the children shall rise up again. That would be Judas Maccabeus. And his boys establish the temple again and start to worship again, and the priests again, and the whole 9 yards. All of that will happen. Daniel's sitting there saying, well, what does it mean? You don't worry about it. You go to your rest. You've done your job. You've been a faithful man of God. And you, in your rest, will be brought up at the end days, and you will have your portion given to you by God. So that basically, Dan, you're all right. You've done a great job. All of this stuff is going to happen. And I really believe that this wasn't for Daniel's sake. It was for ours. That years later, everybody after the Old Testamental period could read this and say, how could Daniel predict all of this over 500 years so accurately, so precise? Well, maybe God was using Daniel to give us a gift that we can trust this book, believe this book, study this book, and hopefully be changed inside as men and women through the words of his prophets, through the words of his apostles, and mostly through the words and actions of his Son, Jesus Christ, saying it's all real. Then we can read Revelation without fear and trembling, but with expectation, thinking, bring it on, I'm ready. So it's Old Testament, people, I hear it all the time, well, you don't need to study the Old Testament. What? Everything that we understand about Christ is in the Old Testament. Everything we understand about God is in the Old Testament. That's the first floor, the solid rock, the foundation. Christ is the adornment on the top of it. Eternity is the splendor that shines forth from it. Everything about this word is important. Now, you've heard me say things like, well, I think you can get to heaven with never having read Esther. Well, if you want to know where the holiday of Purim comes from, what do you got to read? You got to read Esther. So there's no unimportant books in this Bible. God forbid I should ever even think that. But there are some that are more important than others. Okay? Kind of like that handbook you all have in your glove compartment. Have you ever read it? No. Do you read it if you have a flat tire and you want to know where the jack is? So some parts are more important than the other parts. The part that explains the catalytic converter, probably not going to read that. So I'm not saying there's parts in here you shouldn't read, but I'm saying there are parts that are more important than others. Okay? That's all. That's Daniel, folks. Historic prophet. Didn't even know as a prophet. Started out as a very young boy. And no matter what they tried to do to him or with him or for him, he hung on to one thing his whole life, and that was Yahweh, his God. Hell or high water, he hung on to Yahweh. Armies, kings, he hung on to Yahweh. One thing mattered to Daniel. All this stuff, just more junk going on in the world. But I'm hanging on to one thing. When all else fails, hang on to Yahweh. The center verse of the Bible, by the way, is Psalm 118, verse 8. You know what 118, verse 8 means? It says, it is better to keep your faith in the Lord than in the mightiest of princes, or the mightiest of kings. Keep your faith in the Lord no matter what. That's verse 8, Psalm 118, verse 8. Do you know that how many chapters come after Psalm 118, verse 8? 592, I think. And how many chapters before verse 118, 8? 592, and together they make 1188. 118, verse 8. It is better to hang on to God, put your faith in the Lord, than in the mightiest of princes or kings. Amazing how the Bible does that. Considering that Psalm 118 was written before the New Testament ever existed, and before half the Old Testament even existed. Daniel wasn't written when 118 was written. Think about that for a minute. Bible, so many chapters, 118 equals the same, 118.8, 1188. Somebody's messing with Chanter's brain. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not going to be here next Sunday, but everybody else. Sunday school?
I'm sorry?
Are you going to have Sunday school next Sunday?
Probably not. With the people are going to be setting up in here and music and all this other stuff. So, yeah, well, let's take a week off and then we'll start a new study when we come back in 2 weeks.
And
2 weeks is a cook-off. She is correct. We'll start a new study in 3 weeks when we come back. October? Okay, October. First Sunday of October. Okay, good. Thank you. Huh? Communion. October. We'll have communion, then we'll have Bible study, then we'll have communion. See what I have to keep up with? And do what?
Ladies and men's the same day.
I quit. I'm not worrying about any of this. I quit. Yes, you're right too. Y'all are right. Glad somebody understands it. I don't. All right. God bless y'all. Have a great week. And if you ever doubt anything, hang on to the Lord. That's a surety. All right?